Hi everyone, this is Liz from paperandprep.com. Today we're talking about Margaret the First by Danielle Dutton, a magnificent novel that I just finished reading. It's about 160 pages, so it's not super long, it's not intimidating. The writing is beautiful and the plot is engaging, so I highly recommend you pick it up, and this is why. So first of all, to dive in a little bit about the plot, it starts out in Colchester at St. John's Green, which is the house that Margaret grew up in. She is curious and likes to explore and spends all of her time outside and talks about fairies and writes little poems. She's kind of a wild child for the day and the time. Eventually, the plot moves really quickly to her becoming a teenager and going to join the Queen's Court in Oxford, which is a huge surprise to her and her mother because she is so tomboyish and not very social. But she takes this kind of leap of faith that she immediately regrets when she gets to the Queen's Court. She's kind of like, what did I get myself into? Because she's not like the rest of them. She loves to read and she loves to write. She doesn't want to sit and gossip and knit and stay inside and wear fine things and be all laced up all the time. She wants to be out and explore and write. But while she is there with the Queen in the court, she meets William Cavendish, who she eventually marries. He is a lot older than her by the tune of 20, 30 years. But she actually falls in love with them. Their relationship starts off as this whirlwind love affair. But he's been married before. He has kids. So it's not his first rodeo, but it is hers. And she doesn't really know what to expect, doesn't really know what she's getting into. She is lucky for the time because William encourages her to write. He kind of loves that she's this artistic soul. At least the William in this book feels that way. I'm not sure about the real historic William. But Margaret is just this fantastical, egotistic person. And usually, I guess, when you say someone is egotistical or vain, you mean it in a negative kind of way. But Margaret is just so sure of herself and so confident, and she knows that everything she writes is good, and she knows she's talented. So she's a little bit overblown and a little bit big-headed, but, for the 1600s, you have to be that way. If you're a woman who is a writer, you have to say, I'm the best, here I am, here's what I do, read it, it's awesome. Which is essentially what she did. She distributed her writing. The future king visits her and her husband at their home and tells her she's a celebrity because she, puts out all these fantastic pieces of writing. And, there's the novelty of her being a woman writer in the 1600s. She's actually the first woman to write for publication under her own name, which I think is so cool. So one thing that Margaret did that was super well ahead of her time was when her husband wrote a play and he had it staged, she showed up to the theater in a topless gown. So essentially it was just a skirt with some drapings on top, if that. And she had, essentially ye old pasties covering herself up. She wanted to make a spectacle of herself. People called her all kinds of names. They called her Mad Madge. They thought she was just this crazy woman who, wrote plays and never saw anyone and would show up in public in these outlandish outfits after not receiving anyone at her home for a long time. So she was she was infamous. She was the crazy woman who wore the topless gown to the theater. She was, the woman who wrote plays and invited herself to the Royal Academy. She, didn't want to take no for an answer. She wanted to make a new world for herself. And I'm sure, for women that came after her, she was the first woman in England to write for publication under her own name. And, part of this comes because she was born into the nobility. She was born with certain privileges that, the common woman wouldn't have had if she would have been born to farmers. We wouldn't have had Margaret the First. We wouldn't have had the first Duchess of Newcastle, the crazy writer. So Margaret and William don't have a perfect marriage. There is trouble in paradise, mostly because he doesn't have any money. Which is a big issue if you're a part of the English court in the 1600s or nobility. You want to entertain and have people over and have a significant position in society, which is hard for them because he is in so much debt, and he lost all of his land when Cromwell took over. He hasn't even been able to set foot back in England until near the end of the book. So they borrow money, they use creditors, they keep piling and piling the debt, which wears on Margaret. When they do get to go back to England, they rent a townhouse in a less desirable part of town, and all of her friends are like, "Oh, why are you staying there? Like, you're the Marchioness of Newcastle, soon to be the Duchess." But it's because they're in so much debt, and William kind of keeps spending even though the well has, long since run dry. So I think that really wore on their relationship, and it was just an interesting look at, this time, because a lot of times you don't think about financial struggle or any kind of struggle with, nobility or dukes and duchesses and people like that. They kept up the illusion of having, so much opulence in their life, but it was all bought off of credit, so they could keep up appearance. She was just this larger than life spectacle of a woman. She was a hyperbole of herself, and that's exactly what she wanted. Also, a little bit about the prose itself. It's beautiful. And the book was backwards and now it's upside down. Here it is, right side up. So, like, as an English lit major, a couple years out of college, I love really, really well written prose, and this is it. It reads like a prose poem from beginning to end. So I even, usually I just like to read through and see what happens and get to the plot. It's rare that you have a book that, it's rare that at least I have a book that I want to read not just because the plot's so good and I want to find out what happens, but because I'm like, wow, that was beautiful. Can I go back and read that again? Can I go tab this and come back every time I need to see something beautiful and read it? I know this is one I'm going to read over and over again because it totally took me in. It sucked me up and dropped me into the world of the book. So thank you, Danielle Dutton, for your incredible writing and for this awesome story. 10 out of 10, highly recommend. Thanks again, Liz from Paper and Prep. Thanks for watching.